The Diary of an African Husband, Episode 8. Morning whispers of change. Kunle woke up to the gentle rustling of curtains. Sunlight poured into the room, painting the walls with a golden glow. Ada was standing by the window, her silhouette illuminated by the soft morning light. She wore her usual white blouse and black wrapper, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Kunle watched her, his heart swelling with emotions he couldn't fully articulate. "Good morning," he said, his voice tentative but warm. Ada turned slightly, acknowledging him with a small nod. Though her expression remained guarded, there was a softness in her eyes he hadn't seen in weeks. "Titi's already up," she said quietly, before leaving the room. Kunle sat up, his mind racing. This wasn't the cold silence he had grown accustomed to, it was something else. A sliver of hope. The dining table was set, and Titi was already seated, swinging her legs as she sipped on her cup of tea. Kunle joined them, his eyes darting between Ada and Titi, trying to gauge the mood. "Daddy, do you love Mommy?" Titi asked suddenly, her innocent voice slicing through the air. Kunle choked on his tea, coughing as he glanced at Ada. She froze, her spoon hovering midair. "Of course I do," Kunle said, recovering quickly. "I love Mommy very much." "Then why don't you tell her?" Titi said, tilting her head with curiosity. Ada's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at her plate. Kunle took a deep breath. "You're right, Titi," he said, his voice steady. He turned to Ada, his gaze sincere. "Ada, I love you. I know I haven't said it enough, but I do. Every day." Ada's spoon clinked against her plate as she set it down. For a moment there was silence, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, without a word, she stood and walked into the kitchen. Kunle followed Ada into the kitchen, his heart pounding. She was at the sink, her back to him. "Ada," he began, his voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I want to change that. Please let me try." Ada didn't turn, but Kunle noticed her shoulders tense. He took a deep breath and reached for her hand. She hesitated but didn't pull away. "I want to take you out," he said. Ada finally turned to face him, her expression a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Take me out? Where?" "It's a surprise," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Just trust me." Ada's brow furrowed, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Kunle arranged for Titi to stay with a neighbor and took Ada out for the first time in months. He drove her to a quiet garden on the outskirts of the city, a place they had visited during the early days of their marriage. As they walked through the garden, Ada's guarded demeanor began to soften. The vibrant flowers and the gentle hum of nature seemed to chip away at her walls. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Kunle asked, his voice warm. Ada nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You brought me here after I told you I loved flowers, but never had the chance to plant any." Kunle chuckled. "And I promised to build you a garden." "You never did," Ada said, raising an eyebrow. "I know," Kunle admitted, his tone apologetic. "But it's not too late. I'll build you one now if you let me." Ada's smile widened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she laughed, a soft, genuine sound that warmed Kunle's heart. As the sun began to set, they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. Kunle turned to Ada, his expression serious. "Ada, I've been keeping a journal," he said. Her brows furrowed. "A journal?" Kunle nodded. "I started it to try and make sense of my thoughts, to figure out how I could be better. For you, for Titi, for us." He pulled the small leather-bound book from his pocket and handed it to her. "I want you to read it. Every word is for you." Ada hesitated, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. Each entry was filled with raw emotions, his regrets, his hopes, his love for her. Tears welled in her eyes as she read. "Kunle, I didn't know you felt this way." "I've always felt this way," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know how to show it. But I'm learning. And I'll keep learning as long as it takes." Ada closed the journal, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at him, her walls finally crumbling. "I've been so angry, Kunle. But I never stopped loving you." Kunle reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Then let's start over. Together." When they returned home, Titi ran to greet them, her face lighting up at the sight of her parents smiling. "Did you have fun, Mommy?" "Daddy?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "We did," Ada said, scooping Titi into her arms. "And we have you to thank for reminding us what's important." Kunle joined them, wrapping his arms around his wife and daughter. In that moment, everything felt right. Later that night, Kunle sat at his desk, the journal open before him. He wrote with a steady hand, his heart full. Today, Ada smiled. She laughed. She held my hand and let me back into her heart. It's a small step, but it's the beginning of something beautiful. I've learned that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It's about showing up every day and fighting for what matters. For her, for Titi, for us. He closed the journal and climbed into bed, where Ada was already waiting. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with a renewed warmth. "Good night, Kunle," she whispered. "Good night, my love," he replied, his heart finally at peace.